There is a secret in this story that most people won't see coming. And when it finally comes out, everything changes. Nobody wanted to drive for Mrs. Vivian Crawford. 7 drivers had quit in 2 years. She was cruel, she was cold, and she treated every person beneath her like dirt. But when a quiet man named Solomon showed up in a borrowed suit and a pair of shoes held together with glue, he did something that nobody expected. And the day they fired him, the day they laughed and cheered, was the day they found out who Solomon really was. Hey there, welcome back. Before this story begins, do us a favor. Like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop your country in the comments below. Are you watching from Canada, Johannesburg, maybe Jamaica or Houston? We'd love to know. Now, you might be wondering why I'm telling you about a driver. A driver. Not a doctor, not a lawyer, not a businessman. A driver. But let me tell you something. This man, this quiet, humble man, was more important than anyone in that big house ever understood. And by the time they figured it out, it was almost too late. Let me tell you about Solomon Gray. Solomon was 59 years old. He was a medium-sized man, about 5'9", with strong, thick shoulders and hands that looked like they had spent a lifetime gripping things. Steering wheels, tool handles, the edges of heavy boxes. His skin was dark and smooth, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes and 2 furrows between his eyebrows that made him look serious even when he wasn't. His hair was cut short and tight to his scalp, more salt than pepper now, and he had a thin mustache that he trimmed every morning with a pair of small scissors he kept in his shirt pocket. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, a white button-down shirt, black shoes. Always the same, always clean, always pressed. The shirt was old, but he ironed it every night, laying it flat on a towel on the kitchen table because he didn't own an ironing board. The shoes were black leather, cracked along the sides, and the sole of the right one had separated from the toe. He fixed it with shoe glue every few days, pressing the leather together with his fingers and holding it until it set. Those shoes were 12 years old. Solomon could have bought new ones. He chose not to. Not because he didn't have the money. For reasons nobody in that house would understand until much later. Solomon lived in a small apartment above a dry cleaner on Magnolia Avenue, in a part of town called Riverside, the kind of neighborhood where the sidewalks had weeds pushing through the cracks and the streetlights took turns working. The apartment had 1 bedroom, a kitchen the size of a closet, a bathroom with a shower that ran hot for exactly 4 minutes before going cold, and a living room with a couch, a television that was 10 years old, and a bookshelf that ran the length of 1 wall, floor to ceiling, packed tight with books. That bookshelf was the only expensive thing in the apartment, and Solomon had built it himself, cut the wood, sanded it smooth, stained it dark walnut, mounted it with brackets he bought at the hardware store. The books were everything: history, philosophy, poetry, business, biographies of people who built things from nothing. Solomon read every night for at least an hour before bed, sitting on that old couch with a cup of tea, chamomile, no sugar, and a reading lamp that he'd had since college. Yes, college. Solomon had a degree, a bachelor's in business administration from Morehouse College, class of 1988. He also had an MBA from Emory University, completed in 1992. He had worked in corporate finance for 11 years. He had been the vice president of operations at a manufacturing company in Atlanta. He had managed a budget of $42 million. He had a corner office on the 14th floor with a view of Piedmont Park. Now, you might be wondering why a man with those credentials was driving a car for a living. Let me tell you, because this is where the story gets deep. 12 years ago, Solomon's wife, Nina, was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. She was 46. Nina was a beautiful woman. Tall, graceful, with long braids she kept wrapped in a crown on top of her head, and a laugh that sounded like bells in wind. She taught music at an elementary school. Piano, violin, recorder, whatever the children wanted to learn, Nina taught them. She could play anything by ear. She could hear a song once and sit down at the piano and play it back note for note, adding her own little touches, making it hers. The disease took her slowly. First it was the small things, forgetting where she put her keys, repeating a question she'd asked 5 minutes ago, getting confused at the grocery store about which aisle had the bread. Then it was bigger things. She forgot how to drive. She forgot the names of her students. She forgot how to play the piano. And that, poor woman, that was the day Solomon knew the disease was winning. He came home from work and found Nina sitting at the piano bench in their living room, her hands resting on the keys, not moving. She looked up at him with eyes full of fog and said, "I know I'm supposed to do something with these, but I can't remember what." Solomon quit his job the next week. Just like that. Walked into his boss's office, put his resignation on the desk and said, "My wife needs me." His boss, a man who drove a Porsche and golfed on Wednesdays, said, "Solomon, you're making a mistake. You're at the top of your career." Solomon looked at him and said, "My wife can't remember my name. Nothing I do in this office matters more than that." He sold the house. The nice house in Buckhead with the 2-car garage and the rose garden Nina had planted. He sold it and used the money to pay for Nina's care, a full-time nurse, medication, therapy, equipment. He moved into the apartment above the dry cleaner. He took a job as a driver because the hours were flexible enough to let him come home during the day and check on Nina. He could drop Mrs. Crawford at her appointment, come home for an hour, sit with Nina, hold her hand, sing to her, because even when she forgot everything else, she still smiled when Solomon sang, and then go back to work. For 12 years, Solomon Gray lived 2 lives. In one life, he was a driver. He opened doors, carried bags, said yes ma'am and no ma'am, and kept his eyes on the road. In the other life, he was a husband, a caretaker, a man who spoon-fed his wife soup at the kitchen table and wiped her chin and told her she was beautiful, and meant it every time, even when she didn't know who he was. Solomon had a daughter. Her name was Joy. She was 28 years old, a nurse at a children's hospital in Charlotte. She came home twice a month to help with Nina. Joy was the light in Solomon's world. She had Nina's height and grace and Solomon's quiet strength. She called her father every single night at 9 o'clock. Not to check on her mother, to check on him. That sweet man. Bless his heart. But what happened next changed everything. Now let me tell you about Mrs. Vivian Crawford, because you need to understand who this woman was. Vivian Crawford was 68 years old. She was tall, 5'10", and thin in the way that rich women are thin, the kind that comes from expensive diets and personal trainers and skipping meals on purpose. She had silver blonde hair that was styled once a week at a salon that charged $300 a visit. She wore designer suits, Chanel mostly, and pearls that she said were a gift from her late husband Richard, but which everyone suspected she had bought for herself. Her face was sharp, high cheekbones, a narrow nose, thin lips that were almost always pressed together in a line of disapproval. She smelled like Chanel No. 5 and judgment. Vivian lived in a mansion in Brookhaven, a gated community with manicured lawns and houses so big they looked like small hotels. Her house had 8 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a pool, a tennis court, and a kitchen she never used because she had a personal chef named Marco who cooked every meal. Richard Crawford had made his fortune in commercial real estate, shopping malls mostly, and when he died 6 years ago, he left Vivian everything. Somewhere north of $80 million, depending on the market. Vivian had one son, Richard Jr. Everyone called him Rick. Rick was 42, lived in the guest house behind the main house, and worked for the family's property management company. Rick was not a bad person, but he was weak. Weak in the way that men are weak when they grow up in the shadow of a strong mother and a rich father and never learn to stand on their own. He wore expensive suits and drove a BMW and said things like, "Absolutely," and "I'll circle back on that," and "Let's synergize." Words that sounded important but meant nothing. Rick did what Vivian told him to do, always. And Vivian told Rick that Solomon needed to go. But Solomon had no idea what was coming. It started small, the way cruelty always starts. A comment here, a look there. Solomon had been driving for Vivian for 8 months. He was the 8th driver in 2 years. The other 7 had quit because Vivian was, to put it plain, impossible. She complained about the temperature in the car. Too hot, too cold, never right. She complained about the route. Too long, too many stops, too much traffic, as if Solomon controlled the traffic. She complained about his silence. You could at least make conversation, and then complained when he spoke. I didn't ask for your opinion. She complained about the smell of the car, even though Solomon cleaned it every morning at 5 o'clock with a damp cloth and a little bit of lemon spray. She complained about everything because complaining was how Vivian Crawford controlled the world around her. Solomon never complained back. Not once. He said, "Yes, ma'am." He adjusted the temperature. He changed the route. He was quiet when she wanted quiet, and he made small talk when she wanted small talk. He anticipated her needs. He kept a bottle of water in the door pocket, the kind she liked, the sparkling kind with a twist of lime. He kept a blanket in the back seat for when she said the air conditioning was too strong. He kept mints in the console, the kind with the green wrapper, because Vivian once said the blue ones tasted like chalk. He learned her schedule, her preferences, her moods. He knew which days she was sharpest, Mondays and Thursdays, and which days she was meanest, Wednesdays, always Wednesdays, because that was the day she had lunch with her sister-in-law, who she hated. He treated the job the way he treated everything, with care, with attention, with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that every job matters, no matter how small the world thinks it is. But Vivian didn't see any of that. What Vivian saw was a poor man in cheap shoes who drove her car. That was all she allowed herself to see. Because seeing more would have required her to treat him like a person, and Vivian Crawford did not treat the help like people. The help were furniture. The help were tools. The help were interchangeable parts in a machine that existed to make Vivian Crawford's life comfortable. Now there were moments, small ones, easy to miss, when Solomon's real self showed through. Moments that should have told Vivian exactly who she was dealing with, if she had been paying attention. Once, while waiting for Vivian at the bank, Solomon got into a conversation with the bank manager who was standing outside smoking a cigarette. The manager mentioned a problem the bank was having with a property investment, a strip mall they had financed that was losing tenants. Solomon, without thinking, out of habit, explained exactly what the problem was. The anchor tenant's lease was structured wrong. The common area maintenance fees were too high. The parking ratio was below market standard. He laid it out in 3 minutes, clear and precise, the way a surgeon explains a procedure. The bank manager stared at him. He said, "Are you in real estate?" Solomon smiled and said, "I drive a car." And he left it at that. Another time, Vivian left a financial document on the back seat, a quarterly report from the property management company. Solomon glanced at it while he was cleaning the car. He noticed immediately that the maintenance expenses were inflated by about 40%. He could see it the way a musician can hear a wrong note. He thought about mentioning it. He decided not to. He put the document back exactly where Vivian had left it, and he said nothing. But Vivian never noticed these things. She never saw the man reading Thurgood Marshall in the front seat. She never saw the bookshelf in the apartment. She never wondered why her driver spoke in complete, careful sentences and used words like infrastructure and depreciation, when most drivers she'd employed said, "Turn left," and "Where to?" She never wondered. And that was the problem. And then came the incident that started the end. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in November. Vivian had a lunch at the country club, the Brookhaven Club, the kind of place where the napkins were linen and the salads cost $38, and nobody under a certain net worth was allowed past the front desk. Solomon drove her there and waited in the parking lot, the way he always did. He turned off the engine. He ate a sandwich he had made that morning, turkey and cheese on wheat bread, wrapped in wax paper the way Nina used to wrap his lunches before she got sick. He read his book. He was halfway through the Marshall biography at the part about Brown versus Board of Education, and the writing was so good that he lost track of time. At 2 o'clock, Vivian came out of the club with 3 of her friends, women who looked like variations of the same person, pastel suits, heels that clicked on concrete, hair that didn't move. Solomon got out, walked around the car, and opened the back door for Vivian. As Vivian was getting in, she paused. She sniffed the air. Her nose wrinkled. Her face pinched into an expression of pure, undisguised disgust. "What is that smell?" she said. "Ma'am? That smell. In the car. It smells like food." She said the word food, the way a person might say sewage. I had a sandwich during the wait, ma'am. I apologize. I'll clean it right away. Vivian turned to her friends. She smiled. Not a real smile, the sharp, performative kind that turns cruelty into entertainment. Can you believe this? The driver is eating in my car, like it's a cafeteria. Her friends laughed. Thin, careful laughter. The laughter of women who know they're watching something wrong, but are too comfortable to say so. Solomon stood there, holding the door open, his face perfectly still. His hand didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. He just waited. The way he had waited for 12 years. But Vivian wasn't finished. She reached into the car.
She picked up the wax paper wrapper, the wrapper that was sitting on the passenger seat, neatly folded, not a crumb on it, not a stain, and she held it up between two manicured fingers like it was something pulled from a drain.
This, she said, loudly enough for her friends to hear, loudly enough for the valet standing 20 feet away to hear, is unacceptable. I do not pay you to eat in my vehicle. I pay you to drive. That is all you are here to do. She dropped the wrapper on the ground at Solomon's feet. It fluttered in the breeze and landed next to his glued shoe. Pick it up. Solomon looked at the wrapper. He looked at Vivian. He looked at her friends, standing in a semicircle, their faces arranged in polite amusement. He looked at the valet, who was looking away, embarrassed. He bent down. He picked up the wrapper. He put it in his pocket. Yes, ma'am, he said. He closed the door after Vivian got in. He walked around to the driver's seat. He started the car.
He drove her home in perfect silence.
When they arrived at the estate, he opened her door, and she got out without a word. That night, Solomon went home. He checked on Nina. She was sleeping. The nurse said she'd had a good day. She'd eaten all her soup. Solomon heated up leftover rice and beans. He sat on the couch. He did not read. He sat in the dark for a long time, holding the wax paper wrapper in his hand, turning it over and over between his fingers. Joy called at 9 o'clock, the way she always did. How was your day, Daddy? Fine, baby, just fine. He didn't tell her. He never told her. Because Solomon Gray was the kind of man who swallowed his own pain so that the people he loved wouldn't have to taste it. But the truth was far worse than anyone imagined. 2 weeks after the sandwich incident, Vivian called Rick into her study. She told him she wanted Solomon fired.
Not because he had done anything wrong. She couldn't name a single thing he had done wrong, because there wasn't one. She wanted him fired because she had found a new driver, a younger man, white, from an agency that charged twice as much, who drove a newer car and wore a nicer uniform. She said Solomon was shabby and not presentable and not the image I want to project. Rick hesitated. He's a good driver, Mom. He's never been late. He's never... I didn't ask for your opinion, Richard. I said fire him. Rick fired Solomon on a Friday afternoon. He called him into the kitchen of the main house. Not the study, not the office, not even the living room. The kitchen. The staff kitchen, with the stainless steel counters and the industrial refrigerator and the mop standing in the corner. As if Solomon wasn't worth the formality of a proper meeting. As if the room where food was prepared for Vivian Crawford was the appropriate place to dispose of a human being. Solomon stood on one side of the counter. Rick stood on the other, his hands in his pockets, his eyes not quite meeting Solomon's. Rick was uncomfortable. He knew this was wrong. You could see it in the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, in the way he kept clearing his throat. Solomon, we've decided to go in a different direction. Your services are no longer required. He said it fast, like he was ripping off a bandage. It's nothing you did wrong. My mother wants a different setup. Solomon looked at him. Those deep brown eyes. Steady. Not angry. Not hurt. Just steady. The way a man looks when he has faced worse than this and survived. I understand, Solomon said. Rick pulled an envelope from his back pocket. White, sealed, with Solomon Gray written on it in Vivian's handwriting. Inside was a check for $1,500. 2 weeks severance. No hard feelings, Rick said. He extended his hand. Solomon shook it. Rick's hand was soft. The hand of a man who had never built anything, never fixed anything, never gripped a steering wheel in traffic for 8 hours a day. Solomon's hand was rough and warm. "Thank you for the opportunity," Solomon said. He said it without sarcasm. He said it the way he said everything, with dignity. Because Solomon Gray did not take his dignity from other people. He carried it with him, the way he carried Nina's memory, the way he carried his glued shoes and his wax paper sandwiches and his books. His dignity was his own. Nobody could fire him from that. He walked to the car, Vivian's car, the black Cadillac Escalade he had driven for 8 months and kept cleaner than the day it came off the lot. He opened the driver's door and removed his personal things. The Thurgood Marshall biography, bookmark still in place. A photograph of Nina, taken 15 years ago before the disease, her braids up, her smile wide, her hands on the piano keys. A small bag of peppermints that Joy had tucked into his glove box last time she visited, with a note that said, "For my favorite driver," with a smiley face. He put these things in a plastic bag. He locked the car. He set the keys on the kitchen counter next to the mop bucket. Then he walked out the front gate of the Crawford estate for the last time. The driveway was long, almost a quarter mile, lined with crepe myrtle trees that had lost their leaves for the winter. Solomon walked slowly. His glued shoe made a soft clicking sound on the pavement with every step, the sole catching slightly, holding, releasing. Click, click, click. The sound of a man walking away from a job he never deserved to lose. As he passed the kitchen window, which was cracked open an inch, because Marco the chef liked to let the steam out when he was cooking, Solomon heard them. 3 voices. Vivian's, sharp and satisfied. Courtney the assistant's, high and eager to agree. Marco's, low and mostly silent. The way people are silent when they don't want to object but don't want to participate. "Finally," Vivian said. Her voice was clear through the window, cut glass in the afternoon air. "That man in those terrible shoes. Good riddance. I don't know why it took so long." Courtney said, "The new driver starts Monday. He seems much more professional." "Professional," Vivian repeated, as if Solomon had been anything less. Marco said nothing. But he didn't speak up either, and silence in the face of cruelty is its own kind of cruelty. Solomon heard every word. He kept walking. His back was straight, his chin was up, his hands were at his sides, one holding the plastic bag with the book and the photo and the peppermints. Everything he had to show for 8 months of patience, humiliation, and perfect service. He walked through the gate. He walked to the bus stop on Peachtree Road. He waited 15 minutes for the number 39 bus. He rode it home to Riverside. He walked up the stairs above the dry cleaner. He opened the apartment door. Nina was sitting in her wheelchair by the window. The nurse, a kind woman named Diane who had been with them for 4 years, had brushed Nina's hair and put it in 2 braids the way Nina used to wear it. The afternoon sun came through the window and fell across Nina's face, and for 1 second she looked exactly the way she looked the day Solomon met her, 35 years ago, at a concert at Spelman College. Solomon knelt beside her chair. He took her hand. It was warm and soft and small in his. "Hey, beautiful," he said. Nina didn't respond. Her eyes were distant, watching something nobody else could see. But her fingers tightened, slightly, barely, around his hand. Solomon pressed his forehead against her knuckles and closed his eyes. "We're going to be fine," he whispered. "We're always fine." And just when the Crawfords thought they were done with Solomon Gray, the truth arrived. It arrived 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, in the form of a registered letter delivered to Vivian Crawford's front door. The letter was from the law firm of Harrison, Cole and Associates, one of the most respected firms in Atlanta. Inside was a document that made Vivian sit down so fast she knocked her coffee off the table. The letter informed Mrs. Vivian Crawford that the Riverside Community Development Trust, a charitable foundation that had recently acquired a controlling interest in 4 of the shopping malls that made up the backbone of the Crawford real estate portfolio, was conducting a full audit of all management contracts. The foundation had concerns about billing practices, maintenance standards, and tenant treatment.
A meeting was requested at the foundation's offices the following week. The letter was signed by the trust's director, Solomon A. Gray. Vivian read the name 3 times. She blinked. She read it again. Solomon A. Gray. She called Rick.
Rick came in from the guest house, still in his bathrobe. He read the letter. His face went pale. That's the driver, Rick said. That's Solomon.
I can see that, Richard. But he drove our car. He wore those shoes. Call the lawyers, now. But this story is far from over. The truth came out piece by piece over the following weeks, and every piece hit the Crawfords harder than the last. Solomon Gray had spent 12 years driving cars and living above a dry cleaner. But what nobody knew, what Solomon never told anyone except Joy and Nina's nurse, was that during those same 12 years, Solomon had been quietly rebuilding his career from the shadows. He couldn't work a full-time corporate job. Nina needed him. But Solomon's mind never stopped working. He read every night. He studied the market. He invested, carefully, slowly, methodically, using the knowledge he had built over decades in finance. He started small, a few $1,000s in an index fund,
Then individual stocks. Then real estate, small properties, single-family homes in up-and-coming neighborhoods that other investors overlooked. He bought a duplex in Riverside for $60,000 and rented both units. He bought a small commercial building on the east side for $120,000. He bought another, and another. He reinvested every dollar of profit. He never touched the principal. He never spent a cent on himself that he didn't need to spend. By the time Solomon was fired from Vivian Crawford's estate, his personal net worth was somewhere north of $23 million. $23 million. The man in the glued shoes. The man who ate turkey sandwiches in wax paper. The man who ironed his shirt on a towel on the kitchen table. $23 million. But Solomon didn't care about the money for himself. The money was for Nina. The money was for Joy. The money was for the Riverside Community Development Trust, a foundation Solomon had created to revitalize the neighborhood where he lived. The trust bought abandoned buildings and turned them into affordable housing. It funded a community health clinic. It built a playground. It created a scholarship fund for children in the neighborhood to go to college. And now, through a series of perfectly legal and carefully planned investments, the trust had acquired a controlling interest in 4 of the Crawford family's shopping malls, the malls that generated 70% of the Crawford family's income. Solomon didn't do it for revenge. Let me be clear about that. Solomon was not a vengeful man. He did it because the malls were mistreating their tenants, small business owners, immigrants, single mothers trying to make a living, the same way Vivian Crawford mistreated the people who worked for her. Solomon had been inside the Crawford machine. He had seen how it operated. He had watched Vivian treat every person below her like they were disposable. And he decided that if he ever had the power to change that, he would. Now he had the power. The meeting took place at the trust's office, a renovated warehouse in Riverside that Solomon had converted into a community center with a tutoring program on the ground floor and office space on the second. The building was clean, bright, freshly painted, sunflower yellow on the outside, white on the inside, with big windows that let in the afternoon light. A mural on the side wall, painted by children from the neighborhood, showed hands of different colors holding up a tree with green leaves and golden fruit. Vivian arrived at 2 o'clock sharp. She wore her best Chanel suit, the cream one, the power suit, the one she wore when she wanted people to know exactly who they were dealing with. Pearls, perfume, her $300 hair sculpted into a wave that didn't move. Rick was beside her, in his charcoal suit, his BMW parked outside next to a school bus and a Toyota with a cracked windshield. Their lawyer, a man named Gerald Hammond from one of Atlanta's most expensive firms, carried a leather briefcase that cost more than the rent on Solomon's apartment. They were led upstairs by a young woman from the community center, a college student named Tamika who volunteered there on weekdays. She offered them water. Vivian declined. Rick took a bottle and drank half of it in one gulp,
because his mouth was dry and his hands were shaking. Solomon was already seated at the conference table. He wore what he always wore: dark pants, white shirt, black shoes, the glued shoes. He had not changed for the meeting. He had not put on a suit. He had not polished his shoes or bought new ones.
He sat at the head of the table with a manila folder of documents, a legal pad, and a cup of chamomile tea in a plain white mug, and he looked at the door when the Crawfords walked in. Vivian saw him and stopped. Not a dramatic stop, a small one, a hitch in her step like a record skipping. She recovered quickly. She walked to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Her back was straight, her chin was up, her eyes were locked on Solomon. "Solomon," she said. Her voice was controlled, flat. The voice of a woman who is used to controlling every room she enters and has just walked into one she doesn't control. "Mrs. Crawford," Solomon said, "thank you for coming." "I didn't have much choice, did I?" "You always have a choice, ma'am. That's the thing about choices. They never stop being available. We just stop making the right ones." Rick sat down heavily. Gerald Hammond opened his briefcase and arranged papers with practiced efficiency.
But even he kept glancing at Solomon, at the shoes, at the plain shirt, at the calm face, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with the net worth figure on the documents. "I don't understand," Vivian said. Her composure was starting to fracture, just slightly, like hairline cracks in porcelain. You drove my car. You ate sandwiches in the parking lot. You wore those shoes for 8 months. You let me—" She stopped herself. But the word she didn't say hung in the air between them like smoke. "Humiliate. You let me humiliate you." Solomon set his tea down. He folded his hands on the table. "Mrs. Crawford, before I was your driver, I was a vice president at Reynolds Manufacturing. I managed $42 million in operating budget. Before that, I completed my MBA at Emory University. Before that, I earned my bachelor's at Morehouse College. And before all of that, I was a boy from Macon, Georgia, who picked peaches in the summer, shined shoes at the bus station for 50 cents, and studied by flashlight because our electricity got shut off every other month." The room was silent. Gerald Hammond's pen had stopped moving. "I drove your car for 8 months because my wife has Alzheimer's disease and she needs round-the-clock care, and driving gave me the flexibility to come home during the day and sit with her. That's why I took the job. Not because I needed the money, because I needed the hours." Rick made a small sound. Not a word, just a breath, and put his hand over his mouth. "I didn't bring you here to punish you," Solomon said. "I didn't acquire those properties for revenge. I'm not a vengeful person. And revenge is a poor investment, no return, high cost. I brought you here because your management company has been overcharging tenants by an average of 22%. Maintenance requests have gone unanswered for months. Small business owners, people who work 12-hour days and can barely make rent, have been threatened with eviction when they complain about conditions you're contractually obligated to maintain." He opened the manila folder. Inside were photographs. Cracked ceilings, broken HVAC units, flooded basements, mold on walls, letters from tenants, spreadsheets showing inflated charges, a timeline of complaints filed and ignored. "I have 12 months of documentation," Solomon said. "The trust now holds the controlling interest, and we are going to make changes." Rick leaned forward. "What kind of changes?" "Fair rents. 15% reduction across all 4 properties. Proper maintenance. Every request addressed within 48 hours. A tenant advisory board, chaired by the tenants themselves to ensure accountability. And respectful treatment. That one's not negotiable." Vivian's jaw tightened. Her pearls caught the light. "You can't simply come in and restructure our entire—" "I can," Solomon said. "Not with anger, not with triumph. With the quiet, steady certainty of a man who has spent 12 years learning to be patient while the world tried to break him. And I am. Because the people in those malls, Mrs. Nguyen who runs the nail salon, Mr. Okafor who sells cell phones, the Reyes family who own the restaurant on the 2nd floor, those people remind me of my mother. They remind me of my wife. They remind me of every person who works hard, keeps their head down, does everything right, and still gets treated like they don't matter. He paused. He looked at Vivian. His eyes were warm, not cold, not gloating, warm. The eyes of a man who still, after everything, believed that people could change. Then he said the line that would stay with Vivian Crawford for the rest of her life. The people you step over on the way up are the same people you'll need on the way down.
And Mrs. Crawford, the way down always comes.
The room was silent. Gerald Hammond's pen rested on his legal pad, motionless. Rick was staring at the table, his face the color of ash. Vivian sat perfectly still. Her posture hadn't changed, still straight, still regal, still Chanel and pearls. But something behind her eyes had shifted. A wall had moved. Not fallen, moved. Just enough to let a sliver of light through. Later, alone in the back of her car, the new car, with the new driver who wore a nice uniform and never ate sandwiches, Vivian sat in silence and stared out the window at the city moving past. And she realized what she was feeling. It was a feeling she had not experienced in so long she had to search for the word. Shame. Not embarrassment, not annoyance. Shame. The real kind. The kind that sits in your stomach and won't go away no matter how much you try to ignore it. The changes were implemented over the following 3 months. Rents were lowered by 15%.
Maintenance crews were doubled. Every tenant complaint was addressed within 48 hours. A tenant advisory board was created, chaired by the woman who ran the nail salon, a Vietnamese immigrant named Mrs. Nguyen, who had been complaining about a leaking roof for 2 years and had been told to deal with it. The malls improved. Occupancy went up. Revenue went up. The tenants were happier, and happy tenants meant better businesses, and better businesses meant more customers. The Crawfords made more money under Solomon's reforms than they had under their own management. Vivian never acknowledged this publicly. But she knew. 6 months after the meeting, Vivian Crawford did something nobody expected. Not Rick, not Courtney, not Gerald Hammond, not even Vivian herself, if she was being honest. She drove to Riverside. Not in the Bentley. She left that in the garage. She drove a regular car, a rental, something anonymous and ordinary that wouldn't draw attention on Magnolia Avenue. She parked in front of the dry cleaner. She sat in the car for 5 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, looking at the narrow staircase that led up to Solomon's apartment. The building was plain, brick, old, with a faded awning over the dry cleaner's entrance and a row of buzzer buttons by the door. It was not the kind of building Vivian Crawford had ever entered voluntarily. She got out of the car. She walked up the stairs. Her heels clicked on the wooden steps. Loud, out of place, like high heels at a construction site. She found apartment 2B. She knocked. Solomon opened the door. He was holding a cup of tea. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt and dark pants. His feet were in house slippers. Old, brown, the kind you get at the drugstore. He looked at Vivian standing in his hallway. Chanel suit, pearls, $300 hair. And his eyebrows went up, just slightly. But he didn't look surprised. Not really. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a knock he knew would come eventually. "Mrs. Crawford," he said. "Solomon." Behind Solomon, the apartment opened up. Vivian could see the bookshelf, that enormous handmade bookshelf running the entire length of the wall, every shelf packed tight with books. She could see the small kitchen, the old couch, the reading lamp. And through the bedroom door, which was half open, she could see a hospital bed. In it, a woman. Thin, still, with 2 braids resting on the pillow. A nurse, Diane, was sitting beside the bed, gently brushing the woman's hair and humming something low and sweet. Vivian looked at the apartment. Really looked at it. The way she had never looked at Solomon. Really looked. She saw the life behind the shoes. She saw the books behind the silence. She saw the love behind the endurance. "Why?" she said. Her voice was not sharp, not commanding. It was something she hadn't sounded like in years. It was honest. "Why did you live like this? You had millions. You could have lived anywhere. You could have had nurses around the clock in a private facility. You could have..." "Could have what?" Solomon said gently. "Bought a bigger house? Hired a staff? Put my wife in a facility where strangers took care of her?" He leaned against the doorframe.
My wife is in that room, Mrs. Crawford. Most days she doesn't know my name. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know what year it is. But she knows when I'm here. I can't prove it. The doctors say she's past recognition. But I know she knows. Because when I hold her hand, she holds mine back. And when I sing to her, she smiles. Not every time, but enough. He paused. He looked at his feet, the house slippers, soft and worn. Every dollar I didn't spend on myself went to two things: Nina's care, and this neighborhood, the clinic, the community center, the scholarships, the mural on the wall downstairs, painted by children who live on this block.
That's what the money is for. Not shoes, not cars. People. Vivian stood in the doorway. She was very still. Her Chanel suit felt wrong, too stiff, too expensive, too much. Her pearls felt heavy. Everything about her felt like a costume she had been wearing for so long she had forgotten it was a costume. "I owe you an apology," she said. Her voice was thick, stiff. Apologies were a foreign language to Vivian Crawford. She had never been fluent. "You do," Solomon said. He didn't let her off easy. He didn't say, "It's fine," or "Don't worry about it," or "Water under the bridge." He looked her in the eye and said, "You owe me an apology, and you owe one to every person who ever worked for you and walked away feeling like they were less than human." Vivian flinched, just slightly. "But an apology is just a word," Solomon continued. "Words are easy. What matters is what you do after you say it." Vivian looked at him. Then she looked past him, at the bedroom door, where the nurse was still humming to Nina. "What would you like me to do?" she asked. Solomon didn't hesitate. "Visit Mrs. Nguyen at the nail salon in the Peachtree Mall. Ask her about the roof that leaked for 2 years. Sit in her chair and let her tell you what it's like to run a business when the landlord doesn't care whether your ceiling falls in on your customers. Then come back here and tell me what you learned." Vivian set her jaw. She nodded, once, sharp, the way she nodded when she was agreeing to something difficult. She turned to leave. "Mrs. Crawford," Solomon said. She stopped. "The tea offer stands. If you ever want to sit on my couch and drink chamomile from a mug that doesn't match anything, you're welcome." The faintest crack appeared in Vivian Crawford's face. Not quite a smile. Something near it. Something trying. She left. She walked down the stairs. She got in the rental car. And she drove to the Peachtree Mall. She sat in Mrs. Nguyen's chair. A small Vietnamese woman with strong hands and kind eyes told Vivian about the roof, the mold, the winter she put buckets on the floor while customers sat above them getting their nails done. Mrs. Nguyen told her about the phone calls to the management company that were never returned, about the letter she wrote, in careful, accented English, staying up until midnight to get the words right, that was never answered. About the morning she came in and found 3 inches of water on the floor and had to cancel a full day of appointments and lost $240 she could not afford to lose. Vivian listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't explain. She didn't defend. She just listened, the way Solomon listened, with her whole body, leaning forward, taking it in. When Mrs. Nguyen finished, Vivian reached into her handbag. She took out a personal check.
She wrote it for the full cost of the roof repairs, $11,000, and she handed it to Mrs. Nguyen. "This doesn't fix what happened," Vivian said, "but it fixes the roof." Mrs. Nguyen looked at the check. She looked at Vivian. Her eyes were wet. She said, "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. That's the first time anyone from your company has come to see for themselves. It was a start. Just a start. But gardens start with one seed, and change starts with one step. And Vivian Crawford had just taken hers." Joy came home that weekend. She drove from Charlotte on Saturday morning, 4 hours in her little car with the scratched bumper and the air freshener shaped like a pine tree hanging from the mirror. She walked into the apartment with 2 bags of groceries and a box from the bakery. Sweet potato cake, her father's favorite, from the place on Auburn Avenue that used real butter and cinnamon so thick you could smell it through the box. She found Solomon in the living room, reading to Nina. He was reading poetry. Maya Angelou, Nina's favorite, the one about the caged bird.
And Nina's eyes were closed, but her hand was resting on Solomon's arm, the way it always rested when he read to her. Her fingers curled slightly against his sleeve, holding on to something she couldn't name, but still recognized. And her lips were curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile, the kind of smile that comes from a place deeper than memory. Joy set the groceries down quietly. She sat on the arm of the couch and watched her parents. Her father's voice, low and steady, reading words about freedom and singing in sky. Her mother's hand on his arm. The afternoon light coming through the window, warm and golden, falling across them both like a blessing. "Daddy," Joy said softly when he finished the poem, "I heard Mrs. Crawford came to see you." "She did. What did she want?" Solomon closed the book. He set it on the coffee table, spine up, pages open, the way he always left a book he planned to come back to. He looked at his daughter, this strong, kind, beautiful woman who called him every night at 9 o'clock, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "She wanted to understand," he said. "Do you think she will?" Solomon thought about it. He thought about Vivian in his doorway, looking at the apartment. He thought about the crack in her face, not quite a smile, but something trying. He thought about Mrs. Nguyen's roof. "I think she's trying," he said, "and trying is the first step toward everything worth doing." Joy leaned her head against her father's shoulder. "Mama would be proud of you." Solomon looked at Nina. Her hand was still on his arm. Her breathing was slow and even. "She's here," he said softly. "She's always here. Even when she doesn't know it, she's here." That evening, after Joy had gone to bed, Solomon sat alone on the couch with his tea and his reading lamp. The apartment was quiet. Nina was sleeping. The bookshelf stretched across the wall like a map of everywhere Solomon's mind had traveled, while his body stayed in this small room. He looked at his shoes, black, cracked, glued together, 12 years old. He could buy 1,000 pairs of shoes now. He could buy a house, a building, a block. But Solomon Gray did not measure a life by what a man owns. He measured it by what a man gives. And by that measure, Solomon was the richest man in the city. He picked up his book. He turned to the next page. He took a sip of tea, chamomile, no sugar, the same tea he had been drinking every night for 12 years. And somewhere across town, in a mansion with 8 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms and a pool that nobody swam in and a kitchen that nobody used, Vivian Crawford sat at her kitchen table, alone, in the quiet, without her pearls, without her Chanel. And she thought about a man in glued shoes who had more dignity in his little finger than she had in her entire house. She thought about his wife in the hospital bed. She thought about the bookshelf. She thought about the wax paper wrapper she had dropped at his feet in the parking lot of the Brookhaven Club, and how he had bent down and picked it up and put it in his pocket and said, "Yes, ma'am," and kept going. Kept going. The way he had kept going for 12 years. Vivian looked at her hands. Manicured, soft, the hands of a woman who had never picked up something off the ground for someone else. She closed her eyes, and she made a decision. She didn't know yet what it would look like. She didn't have a plan, didn't have a strategy, but she knew she couldn't go back to being the person she was before she walked up those stairs on Magnolia Avenue. Some people change because they want to. Some people change because they have to. And some people change because a man in glued shoes shows them exactly who they've been, and the mirror is too clear to look away from. And so the story ends. But before you go, like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what this story taught you. We read every single comment. See you in the next story.